Have you ever wondered why some people completely transform their health journey after being told there's no hope for them? Are you tired of feeling dismissed or unheard or powerless inside of the medical system? Well, what if I told you that one of the most important parts of healing might be learning how to advocate for yourself? If you can relate to any of this, you're definitely not alone. So many of us struggle feeling disconnected from our bodies, overwhelmed by conflicting advice, and unsure of how to take our power back after diagnosis. Welcome back to the Health Bridge podcast. I'm your host, Holly B, and I help women with autoimmune disease reduce flares, regain energy, and reconnect with their purpose through holistic healing approaches that support the body, mind, and spirit. Today, I'm joined by Dale Atkinson, a stage 4 cancer survivor, researcher, and passionate advocate for patient empowerment. After being given just months to live, Dale completely immersed himself in understanding his diagnosis, researching integrative therapies, and learning how to become an active participant in his own care. Today, we're diving into self advocacy, mindset, integrative healing, stress, inflammation, fasting, lifestyle medicine, and also what it really means to create an environment in the body that is inhospitable to disease. By the end of this episode, you will understand why your voice matters in your healing journey and how small, consistent lifestyle shifts can create profound changes in your health. Stick around because we're answering the question, what happens when you stop blindly handing your power over to the system and start becoming an active partner in your own healing? Dale, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Holly. It's an absolute pleasure.
So you have been on quite a health journey for the last, year and a half or so?
Yeah, just over 18 months.
18 months. So you're still a little bit in the thick of it, but you've learned an incredible amount about what it means to advocate yourself in your health journey. And I think that that's a super relevant conversation to have for the women that are listening with autoimmune conditions. And I know your personal experiences with cancer, but you just mentioned to me before recording that your mom also had an autoimmune disease, so you've done some research
She
there as
did.
well, and, I'd really like to dive in to just a background on you and your story so people have kind of a understanding of your viewpoint as you've walked into this scenario, and then we'll get into really a whole conversation about patient advocacy.
I'll give you the whistle stop version because there's a lot there to unpack. Uh, so, starting before all of this sort of happened, so I spent nearly 20 years working in finance. I was in compliance, which is essentially looking at regulations, understanding massive data sets, investigating money launderers, and that sort of thing. So, I had a very much sort of research focused background. I sat on the board of HSBC's alternatives. I sat on, various boards for companies such as Schroders, Deutsche Bank, all these sorts of things for many, many years. I was very much at the top of my game. I had just left working permanently back at the end of 2023, and I just started my own consultancy. Things were going fantastically well. I was about to start hiring over 100 people, just taken on a huge contract for a retail bank, all these sorts of things. Life was absolutely fantastic. Then, unfortunately, roll on the summer of 2024. And first of all, before anything happened to me, my partner had a funny turn. We had just had our second little boy back in October the year before, in October 2023. Bit worrying, I can't remember his birthday. Then in the summer of 2024, unfortunately, she had what they thought was a major heart attack. So they carted her off to hospital. Very fortunately, actually, rather than unfortunately, somebody decided to do an X-ray as part of the checks on whether she was okay or not. And during that X-ray, they found a small cell lung cancer. So roll forward to the beginning of October 2024, and she went in on the 3rd of October for a lobectomy. So the entire upper right lobe of her lung removed. She came home a couple of days later on the 5th. And then on the 15th, which was our little boy's first birthday, I then went in and had an endoscopy. Unfortunately, being especially as my partner couldn't drive, and normally they knock you out for these sorts of things, They couldn't knock me out because I was driving myself home and I was fully awake as they put the camera down, and there it was on the screen. A whacking great, nearly 10 centimeter, very calcified, very aggressive tumor. It was one of those where the poor doctor who was doing it turned around to me at the end and said, "I'm really sorry. Look, this isn't normally my place to do. Normally we get an oncologist, but you saw it on the screen. We couldn't hide it from you. It's pretty much set to be cancer. It looks particularly aggressive and nasty. I expect you'll hear from the oncologist very, very soon." Sadly, then went home and blew out some candles on cakes and tried to celebrate my little boy's first birthday. Wasn't a particularly fun evening. And then another couple of days later, on the Sunday night, actually a week and a half later, the night before my other little boy's birthday, my mother unfortunately passed away. She had been suffering for upwards of about 10 years with scleroderma, with multiple other autoimmune diseases and issues, all related to each other. It had caused fibrosis in her lungs, and very strangely, she was actually a palliative care nurse for her entire life. So, probably exactly who I needed later on that week when I then found out that sadly I was stage four. They gave me inoperable, incurable, and they told me my prognosis was only 11 and a half months. They said with systemic treatment, I might be lucky and I may get an extra month, maybe two. But given the stage of my cancer at that point, and I mean, for clarity and context, I had a 9.2 plus centimeter primary tumor in my esophagus. It was an esophageal adenocarcinoma. I had a 4.6 centimeter secondary in my aorta, which is about the worst place you can have one. I had one on the neck of my pancreas, and I had between 10 and 12 lymph nodes that were lighting up as well. So it was a particularly bad prognosis. It was a particularly nasty sort of disease at that point in time, very aggressive and growing very quickly. And they essentially didn't think I had time. They sent me home to, as they do. It was a 3-minute long meeting. Really sorry. Do not pass go. Do not collect your $200. This is it for you, sort of thing. Sent us home. And with all the grief and with all the pain in our household at that point, because it all happened in less than a month, um, I kind of, well, I disappeared into myself a little bit. It was one of those that at that point in time, we had our two little boys. We had a Great Dane puppy. I had a partner who couldn't pick up the kids, couldn't look after the kids because she just had her own lung cancer journey. I was making the arrangements for my mother's funeral, and I was trying to cope with my diagnosis all in the space of a matter of days. So I went a bit the opposite route to a lot of people. Um, I decided instead of breaking, because you can't break for your kids, and they gave me every piece of fuel. I decided instead of breaking that I would use the grief, use the frustration as fuel. And I did. And I turned to my background, which was essentially research and digging through data sets and understanding things that are purposely written to sort of obfuscate exactly what they are. So, when you're talking regulations, you're talking laws that are written by lawyers who don't want you to really work out what they are. And it turns out that's exactly the same as medical papers. It's exactly the same skill set that I then needed to sit down and over the course of 3 months read through between 4 and 6,000 medical papers and articles. um, I became extremely proficient in PubMed. I could tell you exactly where each button is, eyes closed at this point in time. Um, and it drove me to a point where between October 2024 and January 2025, I had not just read 4,000+ papers, but I'd also reached out to pretty much every integrative oncologist I could find globally. Everyone from Dr. Thomas Seyfried at the University of Boston through to Dr. Isabella Cooper at the University of Westminster here in London, through to all sorts of amazing practitioners and clinicians globally. I'd gotten an understanding of exactly what I needed to do and exactly which pathways may or may not work for me. And I'd also gotten to the point where I looked into things like next generation sequencing. So for me, that meant having my genome mapped, and having my cancer sequenced and genetically mapped in order to understand what pathways, etc., it has at play. Something I believe that's also coming into play a little bit in the autoimmune world as well, looking at the genetic abnormalities and deficiencies that often are the sparking point and cause behind a lot of the autoimmune diseases. And they're exactly the same sort of things that are there in cancer. It can be a gene deficiency here. It can be, an MTHFR deficiency. That means you don't have enough glutathione being produced as an antioxidant. It can be all these little bits and pieces that can actually accumulate and amalgamate alongside the modern lifestyle, which is obviously not always a great thing for our bodies, especially with high levels of omega-3s and seed oils and all these sorts of things that are happening to us at the moment. Um, and essentially allowed me to understand exactly the way my body was reacting to those things. It allowed me to understand what my genome was doing, and it allowed me to understand the specific pathways that my cancer was using to grow. So from there, we then used that as the basis to design a protocol, and we integrated everything from, I've got red light therapy panels, a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, which I've now bought and is in my house. We've got infrared saunas. I've got pulsed EMF devices from companies like Omni PEMF all over the place. We've got loads of these bits and pieces that we found real, proper published evidence for. Now, admittedly, some of it isn't phase 3 trial approved and therefore not used in some of the, standard of care routes because, well, a lot of it's off patent. A lot of it doesn't have the ability to be monetized. And therefore, a lot of these companies don't want to pursue that route so much. They don't want to put these things out because they can't earn enough money off of them. And if they do, somebody else is going to jump up and take their research, as it were. So we pieced all of these bits together. I brought on a naturopath and a naturopath nutritionist called Dr. Amanda King, who is just phenomenal, absolutely incredible woman. And I took on an integrative oncologist called Dr. Harry Harankuan, who is just beyond amazing. And the two of them together helped me to define a plan of both off-label medications as well as general health and lifestyle changes atop the bits that then I was researching and doing as well. And then in the space of January to March 2025, which was my next scan, as it were, the cancer went from growing and aggressive to suddenly my metastases had disappeared in the space of 3 months worth of my protocol. Roll on from there, and a few months later in July, it turned out that my primary tumor had all but disappeared, and I had one lymph node that was ever so slightly enlarged, and I had very little left otherwise. Unfortunately, I then took that as a sign, as we all do at various points, to, hang up the protocol for a little while. I can go back to normal life. I can start working lots again. It had given me lots of ideas for businesses and all these sorts of things. And I started working 14, 16 hours a day and trying to pursue things and not eating as well as I should have done. And sadly, then later last year, the cancer started to come back quite aggressively. It was back into the lymph nodes. There was more thickening of my esophagus, and all these sorts of things had started to come back. So, very thankfully, I took that as a sign and was able to then get back onto my protocol. I did a very long, prolonged water fast. I did about 18 days in total back at the end of the last year. I've done another 10-day, ended up at 9 and a bit days in the end, one since as well. Reintegrated all of my off-label medications, some of which I dropped, reintegrated my diet and started back on a keto vegetarian diet in order to lower glucose levels. And I manage everything. I've got a continuous glucose monitor that I wear daily as well, just to see how things are going and make sure I'm staying within the ranges I need to. And then I had another scan recently. And as it stands today, I have no lymph node involvement, no tumor, and no visible signs of disease at all. We're
Amazing.
now, yeah, we're now just waiting on a PET scan later this year to confirm whether I am what's called NED, which is no evidence of disease. Because they put me as incurable and inoperable, it means essentially they will never class me as fully in remission. Because as far as the NHS, which is the National Health Service here, as far as they're concerned, I will always have cancer because they put me as incurable and they refuse to lift that essentially. So the best I will ever get is no evidence of disease.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and interrupt the program for just a hot minute. You know that I'm so passionate about this podcast, but what I'm also really passionate about is helping women with lupus minimize their symptoms, boost their energy so that they can indulge in life again. So if you are a woman who is struggling with lupus, who is sick and tired of being sick and tired, who's struggling to manage your flares, if you're finding that your lupus symptoms are just really getting in the way of you being able to live your life the way you want to, I feel you. I've been there myself and I felt the same way. And what I've found is that there are a certain set of health fundamentals that, once applied, will support you in your foundational health. They will support you in building and maintaining that energy, minimizing flares, and allowing you to, again, indulge in life and follow your passions. So if that is something that you are interested in creating for yourself, let's jump on a call together. I will walk you through the process that I use with my clients to get them from sick and tired to strong foundation of health by implementing my Health Bridge protocol. If this is something you're interested in chatting more about, I would love to talk to you. Apply for a free clarity call with me, and I look forward to getting to know you soon. And now back to the episode. Wow, there is so much to unpack and everything that you just talked about, but that's an incredible journey and to make such changes in your presentation of symptoms or lack of at this point in such a short period of time is really incredible. Um, I I wrote down notes as you were going. Um, there's one thing that struck me a little bit because I mostly work with women with autoimmune conditions, and there is a pattern with women with autoimmune to, always put other people first, not get in the way,
Yeah.
hold themselves back, not creating boundaries, that sort of thing, being perfectionistic. Um, and I want to highlight that you really stated that this was more of an invitation for you. Like, you could have either gone down emotionally or you could use this as an opportunity, right? So you chose to use it as an opportunity to learn and grow and ask questions and take action. I f- I want to invite women to really listen to that and hone in on that and do that for themselves, because I think that it's not as easy sometimes for women to put themselves out there like that, to question things, to advocate. And so I want to invite them to take what I'll say is maybe some of that more masculine energy that you're presenting with this to do that for themselves. And in doing all that um questioning that you've been doing, um how much of a role would you say that hope played in your healing? Because when you're doing all this, research and you're finding information, just the searching for the information, is that giving you hope along the way? And how much did that play into, your current situation?
So I think first of all, just to go to your point in terms of the female and feminine sort of energy and masculine energy side, I would probably agree. I would say if this had happened to my other half, I think we would have a different conversation. I think, unfortunately, the role of women in society sometimes and the way that women feel, especially within the familial sort of setup, especially around autoimmune diseases, around illness in general, they're not given the space to have the emotions that men are. They're not given the space to sort of push that frustration and to use it as a fuel because that is seen as being not a desirable thing. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of women don't take things. I'm going to use a horrendous phrase that I'm not a big fan of, but they don't take the bull by the balls, as it were. They don't literally grab hold of it and walk with it. And that's what I did. I got angry at this situation. I got upset and frustrated by it, especially by my doctor having turned around to me and said, very blankly and very not aggressively, but very sort of frustratingly done. I walked into the room. I was in there for less than 3 minutes. They shook my hand and sent me out, basically, and purposely kind of threw all that shock at me. Then said, "Do you have any questions?" "No." "Great, bye." And I got so upset and so angry. And I think my masculinity is what then allowed that anger to be turned into fuel. And I think, unfortunately, women are not given that grace and they're not allowed to do that sometimes. And to all the women out there, I'm sorry. Please, please try to, because It's one of the biggest sort of overall chances of survival. It's one of the things that denotes survivors in these sorts of situations. If I look at the likes of Jane McClelland, who is the author of How to Starve Your Cancer, I know Jane particularly well. We now have a charity together. Jane is one of those women who was able to take this by its balls. She was able to force her way through. She was able to exert herself and was able to advocate. And she is also a stage four survivor. If I look at all of the stage four survivors I know, everyone from Naisha Winters through to Kelly Turner, all these incredible women, most of them, the reason they have gotten through this in some way, shape, or form, yeah, there is an element of luck. There's an element of, disease type and research and all these other things that go into it. But a lot of them have fully embraced sort of advocating for themselves. They've embraced having agency and they've embraced being able to say what they think because, for damn's sake, why can't you? If you're given a diagnosis, it is every piece your right to be able to exert yourself and force your will onto other people. That sounds horrible, doesn't it? But in terms of what it means for your survival, you absolutely should and could. And then to the second part, I don't think there was room for hope at that point. I think, unfortunately, because there had been so much go on so quickly, and I should clarify that atop all of this, because my other half was recovering and because I was then admitted into hospital multiple times up until Christmas, unfortunately, we had to lose our dog. We had a Great Dane puppy, a 2-year-old Great Dane puppy who had to go back. We had my mother gone. We had multiple other things going on in the family. We had my in-laws moving house and all this sort of thing all at once. And there was just so much going on that we couldn't possibly stop to will and to hope. And, there were silly little things like I got admitted into a palliative care ward and was there overnight with people dying in the beds next to me. There just wasn't room for hope in these sorts of things. But I think that lack of hope also helped me in some way because I think if I had become hopeful that this was the answer, I would have probably stopped researching very early on, going, well, I found the answer now. This is really hopeful. This is really good. Whereas I went the opposite direction and I thought it was a despair situation. And I thought, well, I've got to make this Hail Mary pass, as it were. I've got to keep fighting and keep fighting and keep fighting because this probably won't work. And the next thing probably won't work. And the next thing after that probably won't work. But if I try 1,000 things, maybe I get myself an extra 10% chance at survival. And it was just that sort of a situation where, yeah, there wasn't really hope in the classic sort of sense. But I think by continuously trying things and picking out more and more and more and more things along the way, I gave myself a sort of different kind of hope in the fact that I thought it was a hopeless pursuit. I found hope in the fact that I thought it was hopeless and therefore kept trying. And sorry, that's a really complex thing to try and put across, but I hope that made some sort of sense.
It does, and I'm drawing parallels because I had a job where I was in business to business sales, like literally going door to door, business to business, selling cheap artwork. Long story, different topic. But the parallel I'm drawing is that you get used to the fact that the majority of the doors that you knock on, you're going to get a no, right?
Oh, yeah.
But you have to keep going. You just instill it into yourself that you just have to keep going, keep going, keep going until you find that yes. And each no fuels you like, I'm closer to my yes. I'm closer to my yes. So it kind of sounds a lot like what you were experiencing when you're looking through all these things and maybe that's a no, maybe that's a no, maybe that's a no. But maybe if I just keep trying, maybe the 100th research paper that I read might have something in it for me.
That's exactly it. Essentially, I ran off of stubbornness and relentlessness. That's exactly it, Ali.
I love it. I love it. Uh, I'm curious, you were mentioning genetics and genetic markers. If somebody is getting a genetic testing done, I had
Hmm.
Elwin Robinson on the podcast about a year or so ago, and he owns Genetic Insights, which is a genetic testing company. And
Yeah.
um, I did his testing, and we looked into a lot of things, and I find that really fascinating. So, can you talk a little bit more about that? Is that I mean, is that the type of genetic testing you're talking, or is the
Very similar.
Okay.
So there are lots of different types of genetic testing. There's everything from whole genome sequencing through to next generation sequencing through to lots of different things depending on exactly what you're trying to test for. In my specific instance, I came across a company called Astron Health. They're partly owned by a guy in the US called Travis Christofferson, who's a very famous author in the cancer world. They're also owned by various other people all over the places and doctors, and they have a huge amount of doctors who work for them and all sorts. Essentially what they're doing is they're trying to pair together what is next generation sequencing. So instead of whole genome, which covers everything, they pick out specific sets that they believe are relevant to cancer in the first instance. I believe they're going to branch out longer term to cover autoimmune diseases and all sorts of other things, but I don't think they do at the moment. At the moment, it's just cancer. And the reason I went with Astron over a different company is because they also have a secondary layer on top of the mapping of the genome itself. They also have created a proprietary AI system, which essentially takes the output of the genomic sequencing and runs it through this system, which essentially looks at something like 3,000 plus off label medications. It looks at chemosensitivity. It looks at all these little bits and pieces that, as a cancer patient, you sort of need to know about. Um, and it gives you a very definitive list of everything from supplements to diet through to, medications that are for different purposes. So metformin in my instance was one it came up with, through to it picked out mistletoe therapy, which is used classically in places like Germany and Switzerland for autoimmune diseases and for cancers, etc., because it helps to pick up and modulate the immune system. And it picked up all these little bits and pieces, which it then sort of quantified into the percentage of cell death that it was causing against my specific cancer. The only problem is it came up with so many things in my specific instance. It won't for everybody's, but in my instance, it came up with so many things that half of them crossed over, half of them would have been detrimental to use together, and it was really difficult to go through and pick out what to use best. So that's where I then took it to the integrative oncologist, despite the fact that I knew sort of enough to pick out roughly what I wanted to do. He was then able to look at the proper interactions. He was able to clinically assess the entire thing. And Dr. Harry Curran was just incredible at that. And he helped me to then design a full off label protocol using as many of the things from the next generation sequencing that we could in order to create the biggest overall chance at success of beating my cancer.
That sounds amazing. How accessible is this to the common person that finds out they have cancer? Is this something that anybody can access through Astron Health?
Yeah, absolutely. So Astron cover both the US and the UK. At this moment in time in the UK, it's roughly about £5,000 for the testing. In the US, I believe it is covered by some medical insurance companies in the US already. The one thing I would note for the UK side is that within the UK cancer plan, so there's a 10-year plan for the NHS that they launched last year, basically mapping out what they want the NHS to become in 10 years. As part of the cancer plan and as part of the wider 10-year plan, they have stated that they are going to instigate next generation sequencing within the health service itself. So although this is at the moment private only, and it's not cheap at £10,000, plus you then have to pay for medications and all these sorts of things on top, this will hopefully become part of the sort of public sphere over the longer term.
Are you finding, or I should say, how hard was it for you to find practitioners that could then take that data and help you interpret it and help you put together a plan? Because I think, one
Yeah.
getting the information is one thing, but figuring out what to do with all of it is overwhelming. I mean, just as much for autoimmune as it is for cancer.
I think that was one of the hardest parts of my journey, to be honest with you, Holly. There are so many different practitioners out there. And when I say there's so many, there's a very limited pool, but there are so many people doing different things in different places. So if I say integrative oncologist, you could have everything from somebody who may or may not have been a doctor longer term and calls himself an integrative oncologist to an actual oncologist like Harry, who I use, was. There are just so many different people in this space that one of the biggest gains I think I made was to stop to speak to as many different clinicians as I possibly could, and then to only focus on the ones who really mattered to me. I think I spoke to 60 odd integrative oncologists over the course of about 4 months before I picked Harry. I also spoke to nutritionists, naturopaths, dietitians, all these sorts of things, until I then settled on Amanda King, who is just one of my favorite human beings ever. She is just brilliant at all of this sort of stuff, whether it's autoimmune or cancer. She is just incredible. And the two of them, I contribute having them on my team to probably my biggest actual success in this whole thing. I think their knowledge and their ability to put things together, their ability to understand my wants and needs, not just go, this is the protocol, do this. They went, okay, you're vegetarian, we'll factor that in. Yeah, we normally suggest keto and we normally do this and this and this. But if you've got a different way to do it, we'll account for it. If you want to do fasting, yeah, fair enough. We don't normally suggest it, but you want to do this. As long as you're being safe, we'll clinically oversee it. We'll do your bloods to monitor and manage this. We'll account for you and we'll do sort of what you need to, as long as we don't consider it unsafe or to be, dangerous or detrimental to your health, then it's okay. We can factor it in. And finding people who are willing to do that, not just to sit as, a classic oncologist would and go, take the chemotherapy, do this, in the very stern way that doctors tend to. These guys were so flexible, willing to do what I wanted, how I wanted to. They were trying to make allowances for the bits and pieces I needed to. They were adding in things where I needed other things added in or hadn't taken account for them. And they really deserve all of the credit for my success. I mean, I wouldn't be here without them, full stop. So for me, picking the right team is very much one of the best things you can do in this. It helps to give you confidence. It helps you to better manage everything along this journey, as opposed to just trying to pick through it yourself or just going with the first doctor you come across just because they're somebody. That confidence and that ability to rely on them matters more than anything.
And the importance of working as a team with your care team, be, as opposed to sitting in the chair and listening to the white coat tell you what to do and just nodding along, right? That's like the key here is
Absolutely.
we need a team environment where they will listen to you, you will listen to them, and you come together on decisions.
Yeah, and we've even now got my NHS oncologist. So I use a mixture of private and public care. I use both because that's the way the UK is sort of set up. My NHS oncologist very much started off as the white lab coat. It was, at the beginning of my journey, they threatened to pull my care when I said I wanted to use adjunct therapies. When I went to them and said, I found an integrative oncologist, I want to use off label medications, excuse me, I want to do all these sorts of things. They went, well, we thought you were just going to say yoga. Actually, we're not comfortable with this. If you keep going, we might pull your care. We will extricate you from the system itself. We don't think you should be doing any of this. You're going to get yourself killed quicker. You're stupid. All these sorts of things they said to me early on. They sat me down and had a 2.5 hour meeting with me where they brought in dietitians, nutritionists, nurses, all sorts of people to try and convince me out of doing this sort of stuff. Um, yeah, I got very used to that white coat presence and that sort of force and the use of fear to try and pressure you into things and the use of shock of information as well. So throwing a piece of information at you and then go, and what do you think very quickly when you haven't had time to digest it and come up with answers? The polar opposite was the team I created who did the absolute opposite. And I very clearly quickly got to the realization that if I was to succeed with my NHS side, I needed to push them into that sort of mind frame as well. And there were lots of instances along my journey where we had to. There were lots of times when, I turned up to a chemo session once and they decided, without telling me in any way, shape, or form, to take my steroid use from 8 milligrams, which is the standard dose to go alongside chemotherapy to stop it causing lots of other issues. And they whacked it up to 20 without telling me. It was just the fact I caught the nurse with the vial doing it and going, what are you doing? I'm not having that because steroids can cause all sorts of other issues. I'm sure many, many of your listeners will know already. Um, and I stopped them and I ended up getting them to call my oncologist and ended up saying, I'm not doing this. I want every single decision in my journey to be run past me. I am an active part of my care. You are not going to subject me to things that I haven't agreed to. Um, and from then on, well, there were two or three of those, unfortunately, but from then on, she started to get the idea as well. And showing that agency and that sort of that self ability to advocate or that ability to self advocate, sorry, wrong way around, showing that ability to self-advocate then changed her approach to me as well. It changed her from trying to force me into things to now she stops and asks. And it's this is what we would like to do. What are your thoughts? Do you agree with the direction we're going? And what do you need to know to be comfortable with this? And we've had those conversations for probably the last 6 months or so. It took me a year to get there, but the last 6 months, our conversations have been like that. And my care has been so different because of it. It has meant that I am actively involved. I understand. And therefore, first of all, I don't give her grief. And second of all, she doesn't try to force me into things because she knows I'm going to catch her on it and it's not going to go well for either of us. So yeah, self-advocacy. Don't ever let anybody, white coat or otherwise, push you into anything. If you need a reason not to, go and look up the Milgram experiment. And if you know what the Milgram experiment is, you know it's never a good idea to blindly listen to anybody.
Really quick, Holly B here. I just wanted to interrupt the podcast to ask you for a quick favor. Can you take just a moment to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you are listening in on? It makes a world of a difference. And the reach of this podcast, it takes like literally under 10 seconds. So go do that right now. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And now back to the episode. Interesting. I will be looking that up later this afternoon. Um,
It's fascinating.
is it? Awesome. So, uh, we train we we don't realize this, but because I think we do it subconsciously, but we train people in how to treat us. And most of it we're doing on a subconscious level. We don't even realize our role in how people are treating us. But this is such a clear example of yes, it can take time because they want to train us on how to respond to them, right? The white coats want to train us on, we're the authority. You listen, you do what we say, no questions.
Yeah.
We have the ability through persistence, but we have to be persistent to have those conversations. And I think one key in that, and I don't know, what your experience was with this, but being able to have the confidence in you to speak to the doctors, um, I guess speak to them with confidence in that you're on the same level. Yes, they know some things that you don't know, but I'm talking to you like we're on the same level. You're a human being. I know the stuff that I've researched and I know the emotions that I'm having around this. And I want to work with you on this, right? I want to be able to ask you questions. And I've been able to have, in most cases, that type of relationship with my medical team because I don't
Good.
know. I don't see why they should be above me, I guess. But it's so easy for us to just sit back and for women especially, we get gaslit a lot with our symptoms. Oh, we're just being emotional or it's all in your head
I
or
don't
whatever
I
it
don't
is.
think that's just women. Unfortunately, I mean, look at my journey. So I started going to the doctor in 2017. I went nearly 20 times over the course of 6 years and was consistently told, and it was nothing to do with sex, it was to do with age. It was the fact that I was, 30 years old, 28, 29 when I first started going to the doctor. You can't possibly have anything wrong with you. It's psychosomatic. It's in your head. It's your lifestyle. It's something you're doing that is causing this. And they kept doing it over and over and over and over. And unfortunately for me, and to your point just then, in terms of the way we look at the medical profession and being on the same level, I had grown up with a mother who was very much NHS till she dies. She was a palliative care nurse. She was a Queen's nurse for many years. She was, full on NHS. You listen to the doctor. And I think for me, one of the, and this sounds horrible, but I hope your audience understand, one of the fortunate things for me was actually my mother's death. Not emotionally, not anything along those sorts of lines. But I think had she been alive, because she was so staunchly NHS, because that was her view of the world, and because I loved her so dearly, and because she was the medical person in my life, sort of thing, I don't think I would have had the confidence to stand up to the doctors. I don't think I would have turned around and said, actually, no. And I genuinely, unfortunately, think that the pain and suffering of that month of my life is what gave me the, I would say, aggression and anger to be able to actually turn around to the doctors and say, No," rather than just passively saying, yes, person in the white coat, yes, of course you can pump me full of that. Of course, just do whatever you need to. Let's get through this, which would have been my mentality flat out. Absolutely would have been my mentality beforehand. So I think we all have those things in life. We all have the ability to change and adapt. I don't think anybody else needs to go through what I did in order to find that spark. I hope by coming on shows like this and by talking about these sorts of things, it will at least inspire people to realize that they can do this for themselves and that they can take that control and that they absolutely should.
I'd love to ask you one more question about your research, and then I want to go into some of the alternative things that you've incorporated into your, your self care routines that might be
Mhm.
beneficial also for autoimmune. But I had a cousin in town recently who was here. He does cancer research, and we were having a discussion about, you know, he doesn't understand why the common belief, at least among people that go a little bit against the stream of Western medicine, is that the system wants to keep you sick because the system makes money off of you being sick. And he's in cancer research. He's like, we are always competing to get, closer to the cure than the next company out there. Because there is money in finding the cure. And
Yeah.
I'm curious what your research may or may not have shown in in that discussion.
So I think the operative there is money. Either way, and whichever way you look at it, it's money. Unfortunately, the Western world systems have very much been set up with a post-war mentality because, like the NHS specifically in the UK, was designed post the Second World War. Much of the infrastructure behind the medical systems in the US was designed at the same time. And the patent offices that are set up around sort of medical innovation, etc., were also set up at that point. And those systems were focused on finding new ways to combat things because at that point in time, that was the right thing to do. There was a lot of innovation coming out of the Second World War. There was a lot of things going on. There was the creation of even penicillins, not as old as people think. Antibiotics haven't been around for all that long. Chemotherapy was actually created as a byproduct of mustard gas in the Second World War. First World War, sorry. There's all these sorts of things that were born out of that time and out of that specific society that is still in place today. And unfortunately, part of that is patents. Now, with patents, there are multiple drugs. So there's 268 drugs out there at the moment with anti-cancer properties that are known. That was picked out by the Redo project, which is a massive project in terms of repurposing medications for cancer. There was 268 drugs that they identified that had proper anti-cancer properties. Pretty much none of those are patentable. They are all older drugs. They are all out of patent, and therefore there is no money there for companies, especially the big pharmaceutical companies. They have no money to earn out of these drugs. They have no ability to monetize them because, well, everybody else can pick them up and create them for pennies because they're off patent. Therefore, there is no incentivization to look at some of the older medications, to look at some of the things that we know can work in these situations. It's just not the way the system is set up. Instead, we're out there looking for the newest thing. We're looking for the thing that we can create value from instead of turning around and looking at, the last 2000 years of history and maybe societal changes, maybe, diet changes back to what we were hundreds of years ago, maybe all these little bits and pieces that can't earn any money out of at the company level. So, yeah, I understand that these companies are out there looking for cures, and some of them are doing some incredible work. When you look at things like the cancer vaccines, if you look at, pembrolizumab, the immune checkpoint inhibitor, immunotherapy, which I think in the US is called Keytruda. When you look at those sorts of innovations, they are truly amazing. And I should also clarify, I never went completely against the standard of care. I used adjunct therapy. So I used a combination of both. I essentially set my body up to be as inhospitable to the cancer as humanly possible, set my body up to be as healthy as possible, and to try and limit as many of the side effects from the standard of care treatment as possible as well, which is part of the reason I got the gains I did, was because I wasn't trying to necessarily cure myself. I was just trying to survive as best I could. So I suppose in answer to your question, yeah, of course, people are looking for new things. Of course, they're trying to find new ways, but by looking for new ways, we're not also accounting for old ways. And with that said, if you look at things like prolonged fasting, prolonged water fasting has been well known for millennia now. Jesus went into the desert and did a 40-day fast. If you look at the Quran, if you look at pretty much every major religious text on earth, there is a level of fasting involved within it. It has been ingrained to religious societies for many, 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 many years, pretty much since the birth of religion. And looking back now and knowing what I do now, maybe that's because it's one of the best possible medicines you can use. But no pharmaceutical company can patent fasting. Nobody can turn around and actually create a drug for fasting because it's fasting. It means nobody's earning anything at all. Therefore, why would anyone promote it? Why would anyone want to do a full phase 3 trial, which is what's really needed to put it into ongoing sort of standard of care use? They wouldn't, because there's not enough money in it. So I mean, I hope that roughly answers the question. It's just a case of money rules, and there isn't money in some of these things.
I love that you said you did everything you could to set your body up to be as inhospitable to cancer as possible. I love that approach. And um, I also am totally fine with an integrative approach to autoimmune. I am on a medication. I do all the other things, like you said, to and now I have the term for it. I love the term that you use to set my body up to be as inhospitable to continuing on the lupus path as possible. They can work together, and I think that that is the ideal approach. And when you
Yeah.
can manage things without medication, absolutely ideal. But there are times when you can't. There are times when you need help, and there are times when you need to lean more heavily one way or the other. And I also want to get that across to our listeners as well, is like you don't have to be all or nothing one or the other, despite what some of the experts might tell you.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say the one thing to add atop that as well is in terms of looking after general health. The one part, especially in cancer care, that a lot of people forget about, and I also know this from my mum's journey with autoimmune diseases, is that looking at the holistic, entire sort of allopathic approach to health is often one of the best ways to get gains in small, narrow fields. So, by making my body as healthy as possible, by doing full blood panels and making sure that I was getting the right vitamins and supplementing where I wasn't, and ensuring that my body was in the best place to heal, then allowed the specific cancer drugs and the off-label medications that were pinpointed at my cancer to work far, far better. And that's the bit a lot of people tend to miss in this, is it's not one or the other. It's not all or nothing. It's about finding the best overall approach for you, your body, and to just generally give you health. Because without that general health, the drugs may help for a while, but things often get worse.
Right. It's like I see, you know, I follow a lot of autoimmune groups on Facebook, on Instagram, and I get it. You're feeling like crap. You want to go out and treat yourself to all the sugary treats because that makes you feel good, and it makes you feel like you're loving yourself a little bit by giving yourself that extra treat. But in turn, is that sugary treat over and over and over again adding to the inflammation, which is adding to the joint pain and adding to the brain fog and all the fatigue. Like, we have to connect the dots a little bit and help support our body foundationally so that we're not adding to those symptoms, because
Exactly.
you're right, the medication can only do so much if your body's constantly being berated by, you know, not the best choices of lifestyle.
Exactly. And that's the part that many people miss is they expect the medication to do all of the work. But if they're not willing to put the effort in themselves, if they're not willing to try and, exercise self-restraint even, if they're not willing to cut out sweeteners and sugar and all these inflammatory things that are known to be issues, especially in autoimmune diseases where inflammation is a massive, massive issue. If you're not willing to do most of those things, then the medication will only work so far. If you and the medication work together, that's where results get really truly astonishing.
I love that. Partnering with the medication as a team also.
Yeah, and partnering with your body and your own health.
Yeah, and you had mentioned earlier too that you started seeing gains in the first 3 months of treatment, I think you said, and then you're like, "Sweet, I can relax a little bit, I can get back to life as it was," and you start going back into your old habits and old routines, and guess what? It flared up again, and that's another crucial
Yeah,
point that I think we have to learn to wrap our minds around when you start down a health journey is like, at first, the goal is, like, get rid of the symptoms so I can get back to my old life, my normal life, what I'm used to, and it's like, no, because that's you ended up most likely, you ended up where you are with this diagnosis, at least partly in due t at least partly due to the fact that your lifestyle was creating this.
that's one of the most interesting things that came out of my genetic sequencing was the fact that stress, cortisol, the stress hormone, was a massive feeder for my cancer. And, obviously sat at board level, having launched my own company, having tried to hire 100 plus staff, all these kind of things, they were stressful. I was incredibly stressed. I've got lots of gray hair. I'm only in my mid 30s and I've just had a haircut. So it's not looking too bad at the moment, but I am filled with gray hair. And that is all caused by stress. And we very quickly realized that if I manage my stress better, if I cut the bits of my life out that are hugely stressful, well, that's one of the biggest overall health gains I can make. And it's one of the best things for my body. And it stops the cancer from coming back. So, yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with you.
So, what are can you highlight some of your biggest findings, I guess, when it comes to alternative or adjunctive therapies for you with cancer, but also might be effective with autoimmune.
Yeah, of course. So the big thing I should caveat this with first is I ended up spending somewhere close to £500,000 on crazy amounts of things, most of which were snake oil, but you don't know until you try. You don't know, the research supports some of it, but then it doesn't work for you. So putting that out there, I actually think the free things are the things that made the biggest difference. So, yes, of course, the off label medications made a big difference and really helped. But I would say yoga, Wim Hof breathing, I would say meditation. Those three form the basis of pretty much everything I did. I get up every single morning and I do about 5 breath rounds of Wim Hof breathing every single morning. That has completely changed everything for me. It's changed my mentality. It's changed, I don't really get anxious. I don't really get depressed or any of these things that people always think I am because I've got a cancer diagnosis. And I accredit that with being why. And that mindset is also then what keeps me generally feeling positive. And that feeling of positivity is also what then affects the whole body because psychosomatically, your brain does a lot of the work in your body. And if you are feeling positive and if you are feeling good, your body feels good and therefore it repairs and does more things and it's better off. So for me, the fundamentals were those three things. It was getting up every single morning, opening the blinds and getting proper sunlight on me. It was I use a pulsed EMF mat and sit and do yoga on, but I don't think the pulsed EMF is particularly necessary for anyone, but it does help to lower inflammation. It's a really useful tool for lots and lots of things around stress, around sleeping better. It helps to harmonize the body. It's very much similar to grounding where you go out and stand on proper earth, and it just helps to reset some of the ionization that happens in your body. Then atop that, I would then drink some hydrogen water every single day. I drink about 2 liters of hydrogen water. I then also have a copper jug, which I drink copper water out of as well. There's lots of these things. Then I do my breathing rounds. Then I sit in front of a red light panel, which is also hugely anti-inflammatory. And a lot of the things I did were around reducing inflammation, trying to increase and help my gut biome and help my gut repair as well, which all of which would appeal very much to the autoimmune section. And then I suppose the other big thing I should mention here is prolonged water fasting. So I ended up looking up a chap called Walter Longo, who is a very well known specialist in fasting. I did a lot of deep diving into prolonged fasting as well. And I've done nearly, I think, 15, maybe 16 now prolonged water fasts. And by prolonged, I mean only water with a little pinch of, I use a Baja Gold salt. So I have water with a pinch of salt, and that is all I have for anywhere up to about 20 days. Um, it kicks in lots of different mechanisms. And I think for the autoimmune community, the most interesting one is, first of all, gut repair. And second of all, it's in the reduction of inflammation as well. So the process, because it basically stops anything happening in your gut, it actually allows your body to kick in an autophagy process, which is essentially where it goes around and cleans up dead cells and broken things in the body in order to repair itself. And with that, it starts to fix everything from leaky gut syndrome. It can really help with things like Crohn's disease as well. It can help with IBD, inflammatory bowel disorder, all these sorts of things. It can actually not cure. I never use the word cure in any way, shape, or form, but you can help to very much manage symptoms. You can help to increase overall chances of getting rid of these sorts of things and to better manage them longer term using fasting. And then atop that, you also then need to add in a high protein, high fat diet that is very low in sugar if possible, because sugar is hugely inflammatory as well. And it is, unfortunately, our bodies were never set up to have this much sugar. Sugar was not ubiquitous. It wasn't sort of universal until the last 100 years. You know, for centuries upon centuries, millennia upon millennia, we didn't have sugar readily available. And therefore, our bodies are not used to it. Our bodies are not meant to have this amount of sugar, and our bodies are reacting to it, especially with artificial sugars in the US, especially. There's a lot of artificial sugars, a lot of aspartame and sulfamine K and all these sorts of things. Our bodies just can't handle it and therefore react to it with massive amounts of inflammation. Um, the better you can avoid those, the better you can look after your diet, the more exercise you can do. Obviously, not to a level where it's unsustainable, but if you can get a good amount of exercise, somewhere around 3 hours per week of medium level exercise in, and you just generally look after your health in those sorts of ways, you will make better gains than most people, especially if you stay consistent with them. And I think that's probably the biggest thing of all of this is even if you do just one or two of these things, but you do them consistently every single day, you will probably get better gains than somebody who does all of them for a short stint.
Absolutely. Consistency is by far key here. And as I always state, small, consistent steps, one thing at a time. Start with the yoga or start with the breath work. Get that into your routine before you try and add five more things in.
Oh,
Like,
exactly.
don't start the yoga and the breath work and the fasting, all at the same time because you're going to last like 3 days and you're going to be like, this is too much. I can't do it. Back to normal.
Oh, absolutely. And the amount of people I see do that in the cancer world, I'm all in. I'm going to do absolutely everything. And then you go back to them 2 weeks later and they've got, no, it's too much. Can't do it. You know, it's taking up too much of my time. It's this, it's this, it's this. It's just too difficult.
Mhm.
It's, yeah, very much as you said, Holly. It's about layering in small things consistently, getting your body used to them, turning them into an actual routine rather than just a one off thing. And once you sustained it for a couple of months, then add in something else. Then add in something else and something else and something else on top of that. And eventually you'll find that, first of all, it doesn't take much time at all because it disappears into your day and it becomes part of your normal habit and routine, and you make time for it because of it. And second of all, you just get on and do it because it doesn't involve thinking about it. Whereas if you try and pick these things up in phases, or, I'm going to go back to it in the summer or whatever else, it just becomes too hard. It becomes too sort of mentally challenging and you just give up. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody. I think we all are. But there we
Definitely.
go.
Yeah, there's still things I'm trying to work into my routine, some things I start, some things I stop, but we're all a work in progress, and it's just about doing something. Like, what's one small
Oh,
step
I've got a
today?
treadmill right here. I've got a treadmill right here that I bought, used for about 2 weeks, and I don't think I've, been back on since. So, yeah.
Well, Dale, this has been such a great conversation. Is there any last thoughts, that you wanna leave with our listeners?
So I think one last thing I'd like to say is that you can do absolutely anything you put your mind to. If you decide you want to survive whatever you're going through, you absolutely can. You just need to change your focus, your mindset, and that is within your power to do. If you want to advocate, if you want to have agency, do it. Don't let anybody tell you you can't. Don't let anybody stand in your way. You do it and do it for yourself.
Where can everybody find you, Dale?
So the easiest place is probably LinkedIn. I tend to live on LinkedIn rather than anywhere else. I do have a Facebook presence, etc., as well. But Dale J Atkinson on LinkedIn is me, and yeah, that's where I post most.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will definitely link you in the notes, because I would love for people to keep following you. You're doing some amazing work in working with actually the healthcare field, right? To change their approach a little bit to patient experience, correct?
Yeah, so I'm doing a few things within that space. I'm actually off. I leave tomorrow. I'm off to Copenhagen to the Healthcare Information Management and Systems Society. It's a big conference over in Copenhagen and multiple thousands of people. It's the heads of pretty much every European healthcare system. And I am there to talk about the integration and gaps within the system. And then atop that, I've also started a business which, essentially, given my background in compliance, I realized along my journey that very few healthcare companies view risk in the same way that they do in finance. And that there are huge gaps in the way healthcare companies look at patients, treat patients, compared to what patients actually want and how patients actually want to be treated. So I am now basically consulting with a number of companies, trying to help them to essentially fix the gaps and fix the way that they treat patients to ensure that it is a patient-focused business instead of being a clinically focused business that relies solely on the practitioners.
I love
And then
that.
atop that, there's also a couple of charities as well. So we're trying to push for change in systems and all sorts of things too.
Perfect. Every little incremental change that we can make is, for the greater good. So thank you for doing that. And Dale, thank you so much for being here.
And thank you very much for having me, Holly. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much to Dale Atkinson for sharing his story, research, and perspective on patient advocacy and integrative healing. I hope you're walking away with a deeper understanding of the power of mindset, consistency, and self advocacy, and creating a lifestyle that truly supports your body's ability to heal. If this episode spoke to you, please remember you don't have to navigate autoimmunity alone. I would love to support you on your journey. You can apply for a free healing breakthrough call in my link in the show notes. On the call, we will explore what's keeping you stuck and what your next steps towards healing could look like. Please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast and please share it with one person that you think could really benefit from hearing the messages we were speaking to today. Sharing this podcast, subscribing to this podcast, that is how we grow. This is how we get this message out there to the people that really, really need to hear it. So thank you for doing a small part in helping us get our message out there. Until next time, please give yourself permission to ask questions, trust yourself, and remember that healing is built just one small step at a time. Keep building your bridge back to health, and I will see you on the next episode of the podcast.